Today is our third Saturday of Vintage Voices. This is the 11th year that Little Theater, in past years in correlation with other groups, but this year just Little Theater, has sponsored this event. It is an opportunity for patrons to come through the cemetery and meet some of the very interesting people who are buried here. This year is especially special, I guess, because it's the 175th anniversary of the city of Alton, and so the characters were chosen with that understanding of how they fit into this wonderful history of our city. And so we have named this year's theme Founding Fathers and Leading Ladies. So the women and or the men that you will meet today all have been very influential in the 175 years of the development of our city. So that's what we do. It's a fundraiser for Little Theater. Is ultimately it's our one of our fundraisers that we do to help us with costs and running the theater and that sort of thing. But we enjoy it. It's a wonderful opportunity to meet with our community and really grounds us in our history here as well. Because next fall, or next season 2013-14, is Alton Little Theater's 80th season as a theater. So we're very excited that we have a big part of the history here as well. This is my first time as an actress in the event, but the past 4 years I have worked with the choosing of the characters and then the setup and teardown of the event every year. The director, Lee Cox, said, we need a music teacher, which, I mean, we're thinking of this character and we know you can sing, and what do you think about this? And she seemed like a pretty interesting lady, so I was excited to learn more about her, and so they hooked me in.
Welcome to 2012 Vintage Voices, and the theme of this Vintage Voices is City Fathers and Leading Ladies. The program is presented by the Alton Little Theater, and it will last approximately an hour and 15 minutes. I'll lead you, and we'll just follow the signs around.
Shine on, harvest moon, up in the sky. I ain't had no lovin' since January, February, June, or July. Snow time ain't no time to stay outdoors and spoon. So shine on, harvest moon, for me and my gal. Good afternoon. Isn't it a splendid autumn day? I always enjoy the beautiful fall days here in Alton, with the trees turning brilliant colors and the mighty river rolling by so effortlessly. My name is Wilhelmina Trenchery. I was born here in 1858 to Emile and Wilhelmina Trenchery, who were originally from France. Mother and father moved here to Alton in 1837 and resided at 601 State Street, where I still live. Father was persuaded by locals to stay here and open a music school and store, which quickly became a vital part of the cultural growth of this city. In fact, the first piano taken west of the Mississippi was sold by him. Even though Father was blind, he was regarded as an excellent piano tuner and knowledgeable of all things musical and culturally related. He passed his love of music on to my siblings and to me. I studied music abroad in France and Germany earlier in my life. My brother, Emilius, was an Alton Muni Band director. My brother, Ernani, gave music lessons and band instruction, and my sister, Rosalie Whitmore, was also an accomplished vocalist. Oh, I recall many fine days at home when we would gather around our piano and sing and play beautiful music together. I have had the opportunity to sing around the world, but most love working with girls on lovely cantatas and giving concerts right here in my beloved Alton at the Unitarian Church just up the street from here. I have always believed in the saying that without music, life would be a mistake. And I have heard it said around town that the history of my musical family is entwined with the history of Alton's musical and cultural development. Well, I suppose that only time will tell whether that is true or not. I've enjoyed speaking with you today, and I'd like to bid you good day with a popular melody from this year, 1908. I trust it will make you smile and feel special on this glorious day. I can't tell why I love you, but I do. The world is full of maids as fair as you. But something I can't tell seems to hold me in its spell. I can't tell why I love you, but I
do. I'm Sarah Jane Duncan. I was born November the 1st, 1836, in County Derry, Ireland. When I was 6 years of age, I came to America, along with my 2 sisters and a brother, to join our parents in Scranton, Pennsylvania. We later moved to Philadelphia. Now, my father was in the carpet business, but he decided to go to California during the famous gold rush. And while en route, he drowned in the Platte River in Nebraska. My family came to Alton in 1850, along with numerous colonies that came to Alton about that time from overseas. And when I was 20 years old, I married Mr. Gilbert Duncan, a native of Scotland who had settled in Alton in 1852. Now, Mr. Duncan was in the foundry business. He had been superintendent of the molders department in the Piasaw foundry on Piasaw Street until the establishment closed at the beginning of the Civil War. After that, he held a similar position in the Patterson Iron Works. In 1874, he and Mr. Brutus Bruner purchased the old Piasaw foundry that had been closed for many years. And he also started the Illinois Stoker Company, with both companies being major employers in Alton. Well, Mr. Duncan and I were blessed with 7 children, 3 girls and 4 boys. As you can imagine, my life was consisted mainly of family and work in the First Presbyterian Church. I have been described as a woman with nobility of mind and strength of character. I possessed a natural ability to lead, and I had considerable influence in the church council, as well as in my family. My home circle came first, and I was the center of the family, with everyone coming to me for counseling. My religion was part of my everyday life, and I always gave liberally to causes, especially those needed for the public good. And I influenced others to give. It was said that a good cause was never intentionally slighted by me. Well, in March of 1879, my husband died quite suddenly at the age of 47. He became ill on a Friday, and a week later, he lost his life. The children and I were devastated, and it was also a great loss to the Alton community. Mr. Duncan was a man who knew his business, and he always gave entire satisfaction, whether working as an employee or an employer. Now, I was left to raise the family, with ages 22 to 5. But my husband had provided well for his family, so I was more fortunate than most would be. Our son James, at the age of 19, took over the operations of the foundry after his father's death. Our sons, and when Mr. Bruner sold his interest in the foundry in 1892, it became a Duncan institution that reached into the field of mining and railroad operations, as well as the foundry. Our sons, John, William, and George, also worked in the business, with George being the last of our sons to head the operations, although his son Samuel was the last Duncan to head the operations. In March of 1883, I purchased a home at 1750 Liberty Street for $2,500. That lovely home still stands today. That following year, the family suffered another loss with the death of daughter Isabella at the age of 22 from blood poisoning. Our daughters, Esther and Lizzie, and son James never married, and we all lived together in the family home on Liberty Street. For many years, daughter Esther and I would spend the summers in Seal Harbor, Maine. In September of 1921, we had just returned from our trip when I had a sudden breakdown of health and died on September the 17th at the age of 85. The First Presbyterian Church named a chapter, the Sarah J. Duncan chapter, in my memory. Well, the Duncan Foundry closed its doors in 1998, and the building has been torn down. The site is now the location of the Alton Farmers and Artisans Market. And our collection, belonging to my grandson, Sam, and his wife, Katie, was given to Alton Memorial Hospital in 2007 that sold for $700,000 at the Ivy Selkirk Auction House in St. Louis. That was the largest single gift given to the fundraising campaign for a new wing at the hospital, which is now known as the Duncan Wing. So, the Duncan legacy lives on. And I would like to think that perhaps my influence in the family lives on also. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Edward Bowen. Now, if I seem a little nervous or standoffish, please forgive me. It's just that in life, I strayed away from any kind of public attention. But I was asked to tell my story and maybe explain a little why I love this great city. So I agreed I would. So here I am. Now, I always had a saying that I always believed. I said, in order for a man to be useful and to continue to be so, it is necessary that he should not appear to be useful. For I believe that once a man's prominence or involvement in a project was known, envy would well up in him, and then critics and criticism would actually diminish his usefulness. Now, I was born in 1852, right here in my beloved city of Alton. I married my wife in 1896, and we had two sons, John and Edward Jr., and we lived over in our home over on Euclid Place. And from what I understand, there's a picture of our home sitting at the front gate. Now, I was a graduate of Washington University and the St. Louis Law School. I did live for a short time, though, out in the Black Hills of the Dakotas, where I served as county attorney, and also for a short time in Kansas as county attorney. But Alton was always my home. Now, one of the things I would end up doing around here was I'd go to meetings. I'd listen to people discuss and how they were going to improve a project, expand, develop, whatever it was, and I'd listen to their grandiose ideas. Eventually, I'd stand up and ask the all-important question, how are you going to pay for it? For I always believe that you should raise the money first and then discuss on how you're going to spend it, not the other way around, which is customary. Of course, I had to lead by example, and I'd always start a trust fund, and if I really believed in the project, I would put in the first cash gift. Of some of the projects I was involved in that I'm proud of, one is a Haynard Library, where my wife served as director. Now, I was quite the Lincoln enthusiast, even though I was too young to remember the Lincoln-Douglas debate. And I'd collected a vast variety of books and different memorabilia on Lincoln, and I donated the whole thing to the Haynard Library. One also project was the streets here in Alton. Now you see, with all the hills and valleys and long windy roads, it proved to be quite the engineering feat to lay out the city. But we got it done. And one other project that makes me very happy is this great cemetery you're sitting in right now that was donated by the family of Colonel Hunter. Now, when I got involved, the cemetery had come in a vast disarray. So I went together and I got the records and put everything in order. I got a hold of family members of the deceased here and got everything alphabetized and set up funds to make sure that this cemetery would have a long, financially stable future. And I'm proud to look around now and see that this cemetery is just doing great. Now, in 1926, I had to go to Boston for some surgery, for some medical problems I was having. I wasn't expected to make it through the surgery. So, which was as custom for me to do, I made sure all my loose ends were tied up, and so my wife and kids didn't have to worry about a thing. Now, I did have several requests after the surgery, after I passed away on March 20th, 1926, from complications. I had a couple in my will. I made a couple of standards that I wanted. One was to be brought back here to my family plot, which is right here, right behind you, right below the great monument in honor of Lovejoy. And I noticed, ironically, that even though she was quite a bit younger than me, both me and my wife lived to the ripe old age of 73. And both of our sons died the exact same year, in 1980. Now, one other request that I made for my funeral, that there be no flowers. I didn't want any long speeches declaring some of the different ventures I've been involved in, and I didn't want that kind of praise. I wanted a very quiet, private funeral. But there were those, from what I hear, that I did not have control over, that wrote articles about me and told about the different things I'd been involved in. And they actually gave me a title. They called me Alton's Most Useful Man. Is a title now that, when I look back, it makes my spirit smile. And I thank you very much, and I hope you all enjoy this great cemetery on your trip today. And as a passing note, the next person you're going to come to, Miss Maria Rabel, is actually buried right here behind you too.
My name is Maria Rabel, and I was born in Württemberg, Germany in 1838. And I came to America when I was a young woman. Many German immigrants came to America because they were pushed out of Europe due to the shortage of land. But they were pulled into America because of the promise of land and religious freedom. Others came to America because they wanted to start fresh in the new world. And they came to cities where there were German-speaking districts, like Alton is and was at that time. And that's why I came to Alton. I found friends from the old country, and I made many new friends. I even met my husband-to-be, Julius Rabel, there. Because I was educated and a lover of art and music, I was considered an intellectual woman of refinery. And I was also considered a great woman of poetry. And I wrote a book of poetry which was published in 1802, and you can find that book in the Alton Hainer Library today. I wrote my poems in the German language, but there were poems about Alton and other cities and friends that I had translated. The poems that I wrote about Alton were about the railroad bridge that went over the Mississippi River, linking Alton to Missouri, and about Lovejoy. And, you know, I carry with me all the time a little book of my poems. And I know that sometimes when I go places, people would say, "Why don't you read us one of your poems, Maria?" So, I thought perhaps you would like to hear just a little bit of one of my poems about a great man from Alton. Though Alton should always remain a lesser city of the land, she this day proudly writes her name on history's page in letters grand. For him who stands in life anew, the man whose pen hath sent its echo round the world, and who inspired this noble monument, Lovejoy. Julius and I were married in 1873, and we had 2 children. One of them was Rudolph, that we named after my brother, Dr. Rudolf Krauss in Germany, and we had a daughter that we named Frida in honor of Julius's mother. My Julius was also born and educated in Germany, He came to St. Louis in 1866 when he was just 51 years old. And then he came to live in Alton in 1873. He became one of Alton's foremost businessmen. He was a director in several Alton companies. One of them was the Citizens National Bank, and another, the Piasaw Building and Loan Association. He was in the mercantile business, and for many years was in the liquor and the wine business. We were a very popular family in those days. We had lots of parties, and people would come from all over, from as far as Chicago, to come to some of our parties. But my Julius died in 1903 when he was only 58 years old. He had originally made me a vice president of his company. And so, for the next few years, I went back to Europe. I went to France and Italy in buying wines and that kind of thing. But I came back before the First World War came. I died in 1920. And you know, in 1920 was when Prohibition was also passed. And we always worried about our workers. So we did not know what we could do about it. So Mr. Reck, I know that you too were worried about your people.
Absolutely. I am Anton Reck, and I was buried in this cemetery in June of 1920. Right back there's a nice big tombstone. Do they hide it? Let's see. It's right back there. And if you can see with the glare of the sun, I was 80 years old and had several problems with my health. So some clown decided to put on the tombstone, A. Reck. That's me. I was born in Germany in 1842, and like many other Germans, emigrated. And I brought with me, when I came to this country, the brewer's art. I was a brewer, as many other Germans who came over to this country brewed beer. We associate Germans in America with beer. It made us popular. When I came here to Alton in 1890, I bought an existing brewery. It was called the Alton Brewery. I thought, well, that doesn't sound like a German name to me, so I renamed it after myself and called it the Reck Brewery. And we were so proud of the product that we made. We were proud of its taste, its purity, and the aging process that we used. There were several brewers here in Alton, and at one time we were brewing so much that we created a glass shortage. We couldn't get bottles for the beer. We persevered, and eventually the manufacturer caught up, and that is one of the contributing factors for Alton years ago being a center of glass manufacture. In fact, at my brewery in 1913, in one day, we bottled 7,186 bottles of beer. And believe it or not, we drank it all up. We were important to the city. We were leading citizens in the city. The German community was a strong and fairly close-knit community. From Henry Street to Ridge Street was the center of our German-speaking friends. Up Henry Street, you can still see some buildings that were our buildings. The first is the Catholic Church. It was the German Catholic Church. Further up the street was the German Lutheran Church. And a little farther up the street was the German Evangelical Church. So on Sunday morning, you'd know where to find people of German heritage. Over on Ridge Street was the more commercial district, grocery stores, taverns, and a couple more brewers who were friends and competitors of mine. Between Henry and Ridge Street to this day, along Broadway, if you're traveling from Henry to Ridge, on the right-hand side, if you look up at the top of the buildings, one building has engraved Germania. And Germania was a term used by the German immigrants to describe their neighborhoods. One of the things that's still standing today, but not in its original use, is at the corner of Ridge and 4th Streets. And what is there is a two-story building that looks kind of like a school or a church, and it was a Turner Hall. Turner Halls were built in the United States in German communities and in German communities overseas as well. They were gymnasiums and auditoriums and social centers. The reason a gymnasium was included is that the Germans had suffered military defeat several times in the 19th and early 20th century, and they wanted to be sure that German youth was physically fit and strong enough for military duty. They also felt that their culture was under attack by these military depredations, and so they had lectures, concerts, and dances. And we literally wore out the floor of that building with our German dancing. Things were great in Alton for an entrepreneur in the 1890s to the 1920s, but there were clouds on the horizon as well. World War I took all the luster away from things German that we were so proud of. Because of that war, St. Louis changed the names of streets that had proud German names and renamed them very often with French names. Also during that time, the women of America had a huge movement underway. It was the Women's Christian Temperance Union. They were against alcohol. They felt that they could blame most of the ills of society on the use of alcoholic beverages. So they had a slogan, "The home declares war against the saloon." And by golly, they won that war. As a brewer, it certainly affected me. The law was going to take effect in 1920, so in 1919 I closed my brewery. Some brewers tried to get along making near beer and root beer, but I was fairly old, so I didn't take that route. I closed the brewery, and 3 years later I died. And I'll leave it to you to decide whether I died as a result of the evils of alcohol or the goodness of the WCTU. Thank you.
Friends, my name is Sarah Elizabeth Blair, and I came to Alton 157 years ago. I was employed here as a school teacher at a private school owned by a Mr. Leverett. I taught the children of Alton for several years, and then I returned to my hometown of Boston to be with my family. Not long after my return, no one was more pleasantly surprised than I to receive a visit from Mr. John Blair, who at that time was a young Alton grocer. He had traveled all the way from Alton to Boston with a single purpose in mind, to ask for my hand in marriage. I accepted, and before I knew it, I was on my way back to Alton, but this time to make a home here and reside permanently as one does. My husband was a savvy businessman, and he would seize an opportunity that changed our lives here in Alton. The California gold rush was on, and the increasing number of gold hunters were in need of supplies and replenishments. My husband and a business partner were able to purchase 300 head of cattle at a cost of $15 each. They had the herd driven out to California, where all but 5 arrived in good condition, and they were able to be sold for $300 each. We received a tidy sum from this investment and were able to build a lovely home at 15th and Henry Street, where we raised our 7 wonderful children. My husband desired to become involved in the political affairs of Alton. He became the very first school board president, a position which he held for 16 years. In the beginning of the school system, parents were required to pay tuition for their children's education, and those children whose parents could not pay their tuition were not allowed to attend school. My husband saw this as an injustice, and he set about to make it right. As school board president, he began to distribute free tickets to less fortunate families that could be used in place of tuition money. Despite the public controversy that arose, he persisted in this practice until he was able to convince the school board to abolish this pay system once and for all. In his later years, my husband would say, "As I look around Alton, I see many good citizens to whom I gave free tickets, and I exult when I consider how well they turned out." Many property owners at this time of life would have been glad to lay down responsibility and say, "Let the future take care of itself." Not my husband. He insisted on improving roads and making improvements to the city of Alton throughout his entire life. In fact, in his 90th year, he bequeathed a portion of our property to the city of Alton to be used as a passageway from one side of Middletown to the other. Perhaps you have driven down Blair Street and have appreciated the convenience. My husband, Mr. John Blair, lived to be 94 years of age, almost. As it was, he passed a few days prior and happened to be buried on his birthday. I left this life exactly 1 year later, also being buried on my dear husband's birthday. I was 86 years of age, and it was said of me that I lived a long and blessed life, and I do agree. It was said of us that we could have been one of Alton's most wealthy families if our eye had been single to the acquisition of wealth. But instead, we preferred the comfort of this city that we loved. We desired to see evidences of our efforts that lasted long after we had gone. This is how we chose to invest our time and our money and how we spent our lives here in Alton. A life well lived in this fair city of ours, and I wish the same for all of you.
Hello, I am Lucy Long Breckenridge. I was born in 1834 in Philadelphia, where my father was engaged in government work. Later, he was stationed in Louisville, Kentucky, where I spent my childhood. I was educated under my father's supervision, he being an accomplished scholar himself. I also had the opportunity to study under special tutors and became fluent in 3 languages, a capacity rarely heard of in those days. I also had the opportunity to become a skilled pianist, a love I was able to share for my entire life. At the age of 19, I married Dr. Marcus P. Breckenridge, a descendant of the noted Kentucky family of that name. Soon after our marriage, we moved to Louisiana, where my husband became engaged in his practice of a physician. My husband's first cousin, John Breckenridge, served as the vice president under James Buchanan. His entire family was involved in the political affairs of our nation and sadly became profoundly divided in loyalties during the Civil War. Well, with several of our family members serving as generals for the South, as well as the overall political climate of the time, we felt it best to return to the North. As a matter of conscience, my husband became a staunch Union man and enlisted as a physician. Although I desired to stay by my husband's side at this time, stronger reason prevailed, and I removed here to Alton, the home of my father. At the close of the conflict, my husband was able to follow me here, and we remained in Alton for our entire lives. Now, my father and his 4 brothers were all pioneer residents of Alton and Godfrey. Each was a distinguished man in his several professions. It is notable that my uncle, Enoch Long, served as the commander of the defenders of the Lovejoy Press during the pro-slavery riots of 1837. Of course, my fondest memories are of my father, Colonel Stephen H. Long, who served as a U.S. Army explorer, a topographical engineer, and a railway engineer. As an inventor, he is noted for his developments in the design of the steam locomotive. My father was also one of the most prolific explorers of the early 1800s. He covered over 26,000 miles of the Great Western Territory in 5 expeditions commissioned by the U.S. government. His surveys and discoveries helped unlock the secrets of the vast wilderness between the Mississippi River and the Rocky Mountains. After a very prolific and constructive career at various stations, my father closed his life here in Alton in 1864. He rests in this cemetery under a massive granite tomb bearing simply his name and rank. His most enduring monument is Long's Peak in Colorado, which stands 14,260 feet high, which he founded and is named in his honor as a great pathfinder of the West. My father's exploratory spirit remained in our family as the love of country and land were passed from father to son. 4 generations of my family were involved with the Corps of Engineers. I was very grateful to have so many family members close by, as well as a large circle of friends. Not so much as when my dear husband Marcus passed away at the untimely age of 39, leaving me a widow with 5 young children to raise. I never remarried, and I am proud that all 5 of our children became honored members of our community. Our family, friends, and our church community sustained us throughout the years, and we enjoyed our life here in Alton on the banks of the Mississippi with the great Western territory that my father explored at our very doorstep. Thank you.
What a nice group to visit this afternoon. I bid you all welcome. Now the good news is I shan't be singing for you this afternoon. No, my job is to tell you a little bit about the early days of Alton and what I saw and experienced when I arrived here. Now, I arrived here back in 1836 along with my wife and 4 children. She was pregnant at the time. I was 32. And we left her native home in North Carolina and we traveled west. We traveled by steamboat, stagecoach, covered wagon, flatboat, various means of transportation down the Ohio River and then up on the paddle wheeler to St. Louis. Upon our arrival, we didn't like what we saw in St. Louis, especially the way they were treating Reverend Lovejoy at the time. And so we heard about a little town called Alton up the river that held many opportunities. Now when we arrived here, we settled in at the Mansion House at the foot of State Street, just a few blocks from the commercial center of downtown. And it was a thriving city of 2,500 hardy souls. There were over 32 retail houses, dozens of wholesale warehouses, there was 4 newspapers, a flour mill, an active ferry going across the river from Missouri back to Alton. Several doctors and attorneys had settled here, and the city had just built what they called the Lyceum Hall, which was the social center of the town, where they had many lectures and readings, and they also had started a schoolroom in the basement of that building. Well, we worked hard, and a year later, we were rewarded with a charter from the General Assembly granting Alton its city status. That was 175 years ago. In September, we elected our first mayor and city council. And we went to work hard to build up this city. However, in November of that year, my wife and I were still mourning the death of our 7-month-old daughter Elvira when we were woken from our beds by the pealing of the church bell, which always meant some impending disaster. Well, I made my way down to the riverfront and there saw the remnant of the drunken mob that had attacked the Godfrey Gilman warehouse. And of course, you all know Mr. Lovejoy gave up his life in defense of his press. It was a dark stain on Alton and the country, but we would not let that stop at our way of building up our town. In 1839, some friends of mine came to me and asked if I'd like to invest in a new venture called the Illinois Mutual Fire Insurance Company. And I readily agreed, and a few months later they had their annual meeting and elected me to the board of directors and appointed me the treasurer, an office I held for almost 30 years. Unfortunately, my wife passed away along with 2 of my children during the following year. Times were hard back then and it wasn't easy. But in 1840, I met a young lady from Massachusetts and wed her and dated her and wed her. And we had 7 more children during 32 years of wedded bliss. And we worked hard to build up the company, and I also got involved in politics. During the 1840s, I served several terms on the city council as an alderman from the 4th Ward. And one of my most proud endeavors was supporting Mr. Blair and Dr. Hart and Moses Atwood and some other people in building up and establishing our first public school system in Alton. Now, we did have a few schools, but you had to pay to belong to them or pay to attend them. And we felt that for Alton to grow, to be a booming community, we had to offer a free public school system to its citizens. And so we built the first publicly financed school building on Alton Street between 10th and 11th. Later, that building was replaced by the old Lincoln School. Many of you may remember that one. And a picture of it is up on the bulletin board up in the front by the front gates. So we were very proud of that endeavor. And by 1850, I made enough money to build a beautiful new house at 807 Grove Street, which still stands today. It's a beautiful brick house built in Federal style with Greek Revival influences over a raised limestone basement, which reminded me of the many houses I saw in my youth back in Virginia and North Carolina. Now the reason I built my house there was because it was just a block from our office headquarters, which was located at the house at the corner of Grove and Liberty Streets. A catty corner from our office was the home of Moses Atwood, our company president, at 1750 Liberty Street, which he later sold to Sarah Duncan. Well, during those intervening years, Alton grew and prospered, and the politics of the time, if you could have been there. I remember distinctly the falling out between Congressman Robert Smith and Lyman Trumbull over the congressional election of 1848. And of course, we had the big debate in 1858, which set my friend Abraham Lincoln up to be president in 1860. Now, when the war broke out, I was 56 years old and just a tad too bit to join Mr. Lincoln's army. So I put myself forth as a candidate for mayor, and I served as mayor of Alton in 1860 and 1861. Now, in those days, can you imagine, we only served a term of 1 year. So all the aldermen and the mayor had to run for re-election year after year after year. I understand they've changed that now to a 4-year term, and I think that might be for the better. Well, in 1871, a terrible thing happened. It was called the Chicago Fire. Now, when we established our fire insurance company, we made a decision to only sell policies within the state of Illinois because we felt we could be closer to our policyholders and be more familiar with their problems and the risks involved, and not get involved in unknown ventures in New York and Florida and California and far-off states. Well, unfortunately, after the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, the claims started rolling in, and unfortunately, we did not have the assets to pay all the claims, and we were forced to close our doors. But my son-in-law and my 2 sons who had worked with me found new work with the newly formed Miller's Mutual Insurance Company, and they completed their business careers with that fine institution. Well, the final chapter of my life was written in 1878, and my funeral was held at my home on Grove Street. I was brought here to my family plot, where you can see the wreath over here, the obelisk is, and death is in life. I was surrounded by family and friends. The grave over there is Dr. Benjamin Hart, who you may have met his daughter earlier. He helped me form the school system with Mr. Blair. And here lies John Balehage, who was also a board of director of the Mutual Insurance Company and was a publisher of the Telegraph. I also have some other politician friends of mine. Behind you we have a unique situation. We have the graves of George T. Brown and his brother Joseph, who were both served as mayors of Alton. And Joseph Brown went on to serve as the mayor of St. Louis, one of 2 Alton mayors who served also as mayors of St. Louis. So I hope you enjoyed your visit with us today and enjoy the weather. I bid you a safe journey home.
Well, hello. I was just memorizing and thinking, what did my father do when I was such a young child here in Alton? You know, I was born in 1859. This has been my home since childhood. In fact, just across town on Bellevue is where I grew up and spent my entire life. Now, that was a wonderful neighborhood to live in. You know, we only lived 2 blocks from the river. We could walk down, watch the packet boats and the steamboats, and as children, you know, we could play on the bluff. But of course, children, I'm sure, don't do that today. Now, Father, unfortunately, was a businessman in Alton. He had something to do with the Telegraph. He was a printer. He had an insurance business, but he died when I was only 10 years old. So Mother, who was his second wife, was left to raise 8 children, all on her own. Now that was a very difficult thing to do, and as children we became very close. I had an older sister, Blanche. Just like a little sister would, I followed her everywhere. She was just my very favorite. Well, Blanche was very fortunate. She was given a job with the Alton Library Association. So of course I had to go with her every day to work, to dust the books and see how things were going. Now, the library first started in St. Paul's Episcopal Church in just 1 room. But soon it grew, and we were moved to the Alton City Hall. Now, it's the old Alton City Hall, which was at the foot of Market Street. It had a fire and burned down. But while we were there, we moved from room to room as our library continued to grow. Well, Blanche was very fortunate. She had a suitor, and she decided to marry. And you know, women do not work once they are married. So, I, at the age of 21, I was asked to be the head librarian of the Alton Library Association. Oh, it was a wonderful opportunity for me to help support my family and do something that I loved with all my life. Now, the ladies of the association were very prominent women in town, and they finally decided that we should have a building of our own. And I had to agree with them. We had some wonderful ladies. Two sisters had inherited a tract of land at the foot of State and 4th and Bell. And they said, we'll give you that land to build a library. So that was our first step. And then we had a wonderful lady on our board. Her name was Jane Clark Drury. She came from Vermont, and she married Mr. John Hayner, a very prominent businessman. But unfortunately, their marriage was short-lived as she passed away. We all missed her, and while her given name was Jane, we called her Jenny. She was so much fun, beloved by the community. Well, Mr. Hayner came to the ladies of the board and said, if you can raise $5,000, I will give you $5,000, and you can build your library. We'll never tell a group of ladies, can they raise $5,000 with wealthy husbands? It was no problem at all. So in the 1800s, late, Mr. Theodore Link was hired. Now, he was an architect in our area. He actually designed and saw to the construction of the First Presbyterian Church, Monticello Seminary, which was for young ladies in Godfrey, and I'll bet you all have heard of Union Station in St. Louis. So we had a wonderful architect. And in 1891, the building was completed. Oh, I wish you could see it. Cherry wood ceilings, stained glass, a fireplace, and do you know what? They had a private office for the head librarian. So I was very, very pleased. And you know, during this time, our nation was growing. The war between the states had been over, and you can't believe things that were happening. We had the telegraph, we had the telephone, we even had electricity. It was just a wonderful, wonderful time to grow up. And in 1904, the Louisiana Purchase Exposition, which we all know as the St. Louis World's Fair, was held right across the river. Now, there were many pavilions from different countries, so we could learn so very much. But of course, my favorite was the mobile library. And I even got to hear John Philip Sousa sing there. Now, you know, he had a wonderful band, he had a wonderful voice, and we learned so much about music and the library that I wanted to bring it all back here to Alton. The Industrial Revolution was starting, and they made something called a horseless carriage. Now, mind you, I sat in that carriage, but there is no way that I would ever drive that fast. So that's my experience with that. And there were two brothers. They actually made something that they called an airplane, and they went up in the sky. I wonder if that really ever will take off. But perhaps you know better than I do. Then there was the food at the fair. Oh my goodness, they made something called a hamburger. It didn't have ham in it at all. They made a hot dog. They had Dr. Pepper, puffed wheat, and you're not going to believe it, they took a waffle. They wrapped it around and put ice cream in it, and we had an ice cream cone. Oh, that fair was wonderful. As we go on, you know, I came back to Alton and brought all kind of new things. But the library was growing and growing, and you won't believe this, but this community of Alton had more millionaires per capita than anywhere in the United States. We had the railroad, we had the river traffic. We were a growing city. And it was a wonderful, wonderful place to live. And of course, I loved the library and the books that we could have. You know, my sister's married, but I stayed a spinster. Some of you may not know what a spinster is. Sometimes they call us old maids, but I prefer spinster. And I had such a love of books that I didn't want to give that up to be married to any man. So I was happy to be a librarian all my life. In 1912, I was taken ill, so I had to retire from the library. But another sister came along to be the head librarian, In fact, I believe for 48 years, we had something to do with the Hainer Public Library. And it was called the Jenny D. Hainer Free Public Library. Now, there were a lot of public libraries, but not a free one. And that came about because in 1901, someone left an endowment. So for years to come, people in this area will enjoy having their own library, and it will be free. And that's a wonderful thing to know. Well, as I said, in 1912 I became ill, so I had to retire from my job. I had a sister Harriet who took over for me. And I'm sure the library, I hope it is still going today. You know, I have actually been here for 99 years. Soon my 100th anniversary. This is my first opportunity to get out and visit and see people. I cannot believe what the world seems to be like today. But I thank you all for coming. I'm rather tired and I'll sit and rest a minute, but you all enjoy your day and thank you so much.
Good afternoon. My name is Rufus Easton, and I am not actually buried in this majestic cemetery, but across the river in St. Charles. Still, I take great pride in Alton, which, by the way, is named after my oldest son. You see, many people think of me as the founder of this little city on the bluff, and sometimes men's decisions are fortuitous. And my decision to purchase the land that eventually became this community on the river's edge was perhaps one of my smartest. In fact, many years later, the good folks in education decided to name a school after me. Maybe it was because they thought I was so smart too. Now, there are still streets in this city named after my family members. Now, you may think this is a little arrogant, but you see, I had 11 children by my wife Albie, and I simply ran out of other gift ideas. Now, I don't consider myself the city father, but I know of such men, and their friendship and inspiration are dear to me. Charles Hunter donated the land that is now Eliza P. Lovejoy's final resting place. And Mr. Lovejoy himself was perhaps Alton's most prominent citizen. I too was an abolitionist, and in 1816 I was one of the sponsors of a bill to abolish slavery west of the Mississippi. Now, that caused quite a bit of trouble and thwarted all my political ambitions because of the powerful forces in St. Louis that still supported slavery. So I turned my attention to land development. That's when I began to develop Alton as a settlement. I established a ferry from Alton to the Missouri side of the Mississippi, and I began to plat the city in 1821 to 1826, while I was the Attorney General of the state of Missouri. Now, platting a city is not difficult. There wasn't much to begin with here. I was able to build 4 log cabins at the cost of $50 each. Things looked pretty bright after that, until we had a financial panic and I was forced into bankruptcy in 1819. Now, I consider myself an honorable man and a resilient man. And my good friends in the state of Illinois took up the promotion of Alton as a competitor for trade against the Port of St. Louis. Now, it's my understanding that the death of Mr. Lovejoy slowed down all of this momentum. And I do believe that that is the sadness that still lingers in the air today. But I had a blessed life and I had many good friends. One of my good friends, President Thomas Jefferson, even asked me to keep an eye on that scoundrel Aaron Burr as a personal favor. My, those were exciting times. Now, perhaps my greatest legacy are my children. I had 2 sons. 2 of my sons were officers under General Grant in the Civil War. One of my son-in-laws managed the New York estate of my good friend John Jacob Astor. And my oldest daughter, Mary Sibley, and her husband George established Lindenwood School for Women, which was the first women's school west of the Mississippi. Now, they also provided Mr. Lovejoy with a horse that he used to escape the mob in St. Charles and come to Alton. How I wish I could have been alive when Mr. Lovejoy came to Alton to face his attackers, because I would have given him as much support and as possible to continue the freedom of speech and the freedom of all men. The monument that sits on this sacred land today is a testament to the glory and the angst that helped build this city. Alton was presented with a town charter in 1833, a year before my death. I was quite proud of that. Still, I wish I could have done more, but I do believe that Alton will continue to hold on to its goodness and that others will gather up the reins as guardians of this city's fate. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name, as you've been told, is Viola Voss, and I'm here today not as a leading lady in Alton's founding, but rather as a lover of Alton's history. Now, unlike Mr. Easton, I am buried in this cemetery. I was born and raised in Alton and left for 37 years to teach school in Topeka, Kansas. But I returned here in 1960 when I retired and became very involved in preserving Alton's history. In fact, I wrote this little book called Footprints and Echoes from Historical Alton Area. Now, my dress today is not what I personally would have worn, but rather is typical of what a woman would have worn who was an early settler of any one of the Altons. Yes, what I said is correct. There were a number of communities, small villages in this area, all using the name of Alton. And we'll see how when they're all brought together, they comprise what we know as Alton today. Now, Mr. Easton was awarded this plat of land in 1818, and being the clever man that he is, realized that this could well become a crossroads. And his plat was bounded on the south by the Mississippi River, on the west by what we know as Piasaw Street, on the north by 9th Street, and on the east by Henry Street. And as he's already told you, the town was named for his oldest son, but he also named streets after his sons. So we have Henry Street, and then Langdon Street, and then George Street, and then Alton Street, and the family name of Easton Street, and Albee Street, which was his wife's name. And as he told you, the town of Alton was chartered in 1833, but it did not become legally incorporated until 1837, 175 years ago today, or this year, so thus our celebration of the 175th, all during this year. Now, the area that was Mr. Easton platted is an area that we refer to mostly as Middletown today. However, early on, it was called Lower Alton. And that was because another community, a little village to the north and east, was called Upper Alton. That area was also laid out in 1818, 1817 of that time by a Mr. Joseph Meacham. And it was simply early on a community of small log cabins. However, during the 1800s, it showed the promise of being the larger and more influential community, as it had both Shirtliff College and Western Military Academy. Now, this Mr. Meacham also purchased land adjacent to Mr. Easton's, with a boundary on the west with Henry Street, on the north by Union Street, and on the east by Shields Branch, which we would know as Pearl Street. He soon sold that land to a Major Charles Hunter. Subsequently, that area has been known as Hunterstown ever since. And I believe, as Mr. Easton mentioned to you, Major Hunter donated the land for this city cemetery. Thus, today we're really standing in Hunterstown. And although negotiations started very early, it was not until 1874 that Hunterstown was taken into Alton. Then we have North Alton. Now, that was simply a small community up the hill from Lower Alton. It did not have any specific boundaries. There was a vinegar factory, a coal mine, some small shops, and the Buck Inn, which was a tavern stop on the stagecoach route of Wells Fargo fame. It was so called because it had a large deer head with big antlers over the door. Thus, we have the development of Alton. From this small little plat in 1817 or 1837 when it was actually chartered, to taking in of Hunterstown in 1874. North Alton was not annexed until 1907, Upper Alton in 1911, and lastly, the Milton area, which was settled in the early 1800s as well, but not annexed into Alton until 1916. And in closing, I would like to read a short passage from my book. History reveals for us that each generation of people leaves its marks upon the land. Explorers and trappers with rifles got acquainted with the land. Homesteaders with axes cleared the land for various purposes. The farmer, who invented the plow, cultivated the land for his family and his neighbors. He also improved roads so that he could share, sell, and ship surplus supplies to others, both near and far. Preachers and teachers provided the cultural backgrounds. Civic leaders, businessmen, and industrialists supplied the necessary finances. Dedicated men and women, and children too, serving in these various activities throughout the years, have given Alton, Illinois, a very rich heritage. Thank you.